Hi, this is Nick, and this is going to be a review of how to get started in philosophy of history, some basic books to think about. So I start with this pair, W.H. Walsh's Philosophy of History and Introduction and Dray's Philosophy of History. The Walsh book is originally published in 51 with the second edition in 58. These two books are sometimes credited as being making philosophy of history respectable in Anglo-American academia, as it were. And Dray's book came out in 64. So they're both relatively early in the field in English-speaking philosophy of history. Walsh also wrote a book on metaphysics, and that's significant in this context because it's good to keep in mind that there are metaphysical issues in history apart from what we think of as metaphysical or speculative philosophies of history. Dray's book has a chapter called A Metaphysical Approach, and it's just all about Hegel. But Walsh is very up on the metaphysical issues, and many of these are both directly relevant to metaphysics and directly relevant to philosophy of history. So if we take something like the principle of sufficient reason, that everything has a cause, or nothing happens without a cause, both of which could be formulations of the principles of sufficient reason. This is a fundamental metaphysical principle, whether one accepts it or rejects it. At the same time, it's also a historical principle, because if you hold that everything has a cause, you will go through history looking for the causes of events and institutions and persons and try to show what those causes are. Similarly, the will the future be like the past is the classic question of induction and therefore philosophy of science. But at the same time, it's a question of philosophy of history if the future is going to be like the past. So by keeping these metaphysical ideas in front of the reader, we get a perspective on a metaphysical philosophy of history that's not necessarily the kind of speculative philosophy of history that is embodied by Hegel, as it were. Dray also edited a collection, Philosophical Analysis in History, that mostly focuses on analytical philosophy of history. The next pair of books I'm going to talk about, Carr's, Ted Carr's What is History, and G.R. Elton's the Practice of History. And Carr's book was almost a sensation in historiography. It was talked about by a lot of people. And there is a biography of Ted Carr, The Vices of Integrity, E.H. Carr, 1892 and 1982. He called it as provocative as possible. He criticized Isaiah Berlin. He minimized the role of contingency, and he criticized Popper's The Poverty of Historicism. And this was eventually answered, as it were, by Geoffrey Elton. And Elton is a classic curmudgeon. He's a very cranky writer, but cranky in a fun way. And his book has a very memorable opening paragraph. The future is dark, the present burdensome, only the past, dead and finished, bears contemplating. Those who look upon it have survived it. They are its product and its victors. No wonder, therefore, that men concern themselves with history. So Carr's book first, and then Elton's book after that, came to be known in historiography as the Carr-Elton debate, where Carr is understood to be something of a relativist, who downplays contingencies. And while Elton doesn't disagree with him in everything, he does particularly criticize Carr's relativism, which he feels undermines history completely. So the next pair of books are a couple of anthologies. Hans Meyerhoff's The Philosophy of History in Our Time and The Varieties of History by Fritz Stern. The Stern book is more historiographical, more direct readings from historians about history. And the Meyerhoff book is more philosophical and more from philosophers about what historians are trying to do, as it were. But there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a lot of texts here that are difficult to get elsewhere, so they're very handy anthologies to have around. Next, Gordon Leff's History and Social Theory. This is not a well-known book, but it is excellent. Gordon Leff went to A.S. Neal Summerhill School, which is an experimental school, criticized by a lot of people, but apparently worked out for Leff. Leff became a noted medievalist and wrote a widely available and often read book on medieval philosophy, medieval thought from St. Augustine to Occam. There was a mid-20th century push to integrate psychology and sociology into history, and Leff's book is partly a response to that movement. Bruce Maslis is the one who's best known for integrating psychology into history, which is sometimes called psychohistory, not to be confused with Asimov's version of psychohistory and the Foundation books. But it's not only concerned with these social movements and integrating social science into history. The chapter on periodization is one of the best I've read. So this is really an excellent introduction to historiography. And this is Leff's book on medieval thought that's also, like I said, widely read. Next, History and Historians by Mark Gilderhus. I have both the 3rd edition and the 4th edition. There's some slight differences between the two. In the 4th edition, there's a supplement on a 1995 exhibition at the Smithsonian Institute about the Enola Gay and the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, called Culture Wars and Postmodernism. That's an interesting application of historiographical problems in a very concrete case. And we've seen in the decades since 1995 how museums have become one of the battlegrounds of the culture war, and we find these issues coming up time and time again. So that's a useful discussion. Now, a book that is a classic, not just an introduction, like these other books I've been talking about, but a classic is Hegel's Introduction to the Philosophy of History. This is just the introduction to the lectures that were basically assembled from students' notes later. There is not yet a English translation of the definitive text of the Hegel's Philosophy of History. There's the older Seabury translation, but it doesn't have the scholarship of later editions integrated into it. But like I said, the introduction is readable, and it has some of Hegel's most famous lines in it, like the one about history being a slaughter bench. So well worth reading and not that difficult to get through like you might expect from Hegel. Another book, and the 10th of my 10 books I'm going to talk about today, is Mark Bloch's The Historian's Craft. Mark Bloch was, along with Lucien Febvre and Fernand Braudel, a founder of the Annales School, which is a French school of historiography mostly in the second half of the 20th century, but obviously This dates from before that. Bloch was active in the French resistance, was captured and was executed by the Gestapo. So when France fell to the Germans at the beginning of the Second World War, Bloch wrote a really remarkable manuscript called Strange Defeat, which he talks about the collapse of French forces. And then during the war, when he is both working for the resistance and writing this manuscript that would be survive as the historian's craft, he's writing this. And it has one of the best discussions I've found, the only discussion I found of historical observation. What does it mean to observe history? And I find that very valuable. And Braudel also wrote a book of essays on history. And these are very interesting, but I don't find them philosophically as stimulating as Bloch's book. So that's why I recommend the Bloch book. So the 10 books I recommend to get started in philosophy of history then are W.H. Walsh, Philosophy of History and Introduction, William Dray, Philosophy of History, Ted Carr's What is History, Geoffrey Elton, The Practice of History, Hans Meyerhoff, Philosophy of History in Our Time, The Varieties of History, Fritz Stern, Gordon Leff's History and Social Theory, Mark Gilderhus, History of Historians, Hegel's Introduction to Philosophy of History, and Mark Bloch's The Historian's Craft. So hopefully this will be the first of a series of talks about philosophers of history. I've been posting to a Quora forum that I started on the philosophy of history for 3 years now. And having written a lot now, I want to make the shift to video content if I can make that shift. So the plan is to start posting short profiles of important philosophers of history and important historians who are philosophically interesting as part of this series. And this will be the first one. So thank you very much. Take it easy.